What if I told you the story of rock isn't just the legendary albums you see on posters, but also the absolute disasters your favorite bands wish you'd forget? We talk all day about the classics, Back in Black, Nevermind, Dark Side of the Moon. But there's a secret shadow history too. The awkward trend-chasing experiments, the overproduced messes, the comeback records that should have stayed in the vault, albums that turned arena gods into very confused mortals. Tonight, we're digging up the 15 rock records that went wrong. Not weird little indie flops, big name-brand bands. Some of these albums were so hyped, so expensive, or so misguided that they've become legends for all the wrong reasons. Critics buried them, fans argued over them, and in a few cases, the bands themselves ran away from them. So grab your headphones, open your mind, and maybe a stiff drink. We're counting down the 15 worst rock albums of all time, and why they're so bad, even if you secretly love one of them. Number 15. Yes, Heaven and Earth. If you ever saw the dreamy Roger Dean cover and thought, okay, classic Yes prog time, you probably hit play, and immediately wondered why everything sounded like soft, adult contemporary. Sonically, this album drifts. The guitars are gentle, the tempos are slow, the drums feel light and polite. It's less epic space odyssey and more quiet Sunday afternoon in a hotel lobby. You keep waiting for that huge, twisting Yes riff or a wild time change, and it never quite arrives. This was Yes in 2014, with new singer John Davison and the legendary Chris Squire on what would be his final studio album with the band. On paper, it should have been a fresh chapter. Instead, a lot of fans and critics heard a tired band on autopilot, with songs that just kind of float by. Some prog reviewers flat out call it the weakest Yes album ever, pointing to the lack of energy and ambition. Fun fact, even members of Yes have since talked about how tricky and frustrating this record was to make, with songs that never fully developed and sessions that dragged. Number 14. Weezer, Raditude. You might remember the cover, a dog flying through a living room. If you picked it up hoping for another Blue album or Pinkerton, you got hit with songs like I'm Your Daddy and a collaboration with Lil Wayne instead. The sound here leans hard into glossy power pop. Big compressed guitars, huge sugar-coated choruses, and hooks that sound tailor-made for teen movie trailers. But underneath, a lot of fans heard something hollow, like Weezer was doing cosplay as a top 40 pop band. Raditude was their 7th album, packed with outside songwriters and producers, including Dr. Luke on tracks like I'm Your Daddy. Critics described it as vapid power pop purgatory, and an album of surface-level appeal with very little heart underneath. Fun fact, a lot of longtime Weezer fans point to Raditude as the moment they finally said, okay, I'm out. Others defend it as dumb fun if you pretend it's not a Weezer record. I got bills on top of bills and I don't know where I'm getting my money from. After this, the band slowly worked their way back towards something closer to their classic sound, and Raditude became their own personal punching bag. For diehards, this is the album you bring up when you want to argue about how far a rock band can bend toward pop before they actually break. I want the sun to shine on me. Number 13. R.E.M. Around the Sun. Picture this. One of the most beloved alternative rock bands of all time, famous for jangly guitars and emotional anthems like Losing My Religion, releases an album that feels like walking through wet cement. The vibe is slow, hazy, and sleepy. Soft electronics, mid-tempo grooves, and Michael Stipe sounding more weary than inspired. There are melodies here, but everything feels muffled, like the band is playing from another room with the door half closed. By the time Around the Sun dropped, R.E.M. were deep into their post-Bill Berry era, experimenting with a more subdued sound. Retrospectives now almost universally call this their low point. Rolling Stone later put it on their list of 50 genuinely horrible albums by brilliant artists, singling it out as the one dude among otherwise stellar late-period records. Fun fact, when the band later played some of these songs live, they actually sounded pretty strong, which just made fans more frustrated with how limp the studio versions felt. Afterward, R.E.M. tightened up, rocked a little harder again, and slowly recovered their reputation. But Around the Sun remains that album, the one nearly every R.E.M. fan uses as shorthand for what happens when mood and polish completely smother the spark. Number 12. The Stooges, The Weirdness. Imagine you're a punk fan who worships funhouse and raw power. The Stooges finally reunite after 3 decades, with Iggy Pop back out front. And what you get is a record that sounds more like a bar band trying to remember how to be dangerous. The guitars are fuzzy, the riffs try to lunge, and Iggy still snarls, but the magic's not really there. Tonally, the album feels oddly stiff and thin, with songs that blur together instead of exploding like they used to. Released in 2007 and produced by Steve Albini, The Weirdness was supposed to be a triumphant comeback. Instead, critics called it a disappointing return, pointing out weak songwriting and a general lack of menace. Fans who expected primal chaos got something that sounded almost polite. Fun fact, some defenders argue this album isn't truly awful, just painfully average, which, for a band like the Stooges, might be the harshest criticism of all. After it landed with a thud, the Stooges focused more on their live legacy, leaning hard into the classic material. The Weirdness is the reminder that sometimes the most punk thing a band can do is not try to recapture the past on tape. Number 11. Motley Crue, Generation Swine. If you were a Crue fan in the 80s, you knew them for sleazy riffs, big choruses, and songs built for bad decisions. Then the 90s hit, alternative rock took over, and suddenly this band tried to sound industrial and modern. The guitars on Generation Swine are jagged, the production is harsh, and there are weird electronic touches that feel bolted on.
She's so afraid of this.
You can almost hear the band wrestling with grunge and 9 Inch Nails style darkness while still trying to write arena hooks. The backstory is just as messy. The album started life with John Corabi on vocals, then the label pushed the band to bring Vince Neil back, leading to rewrites, re-recordings, and clashing visions. The result? A confused record that critics and fans slammed as one of the weakest in the Crue catalog, an alt-metal makeover that didn't fit. Fun fact, despite all that, the band still performed a few songs from it live for a while, as if trying to will the album into being better than it was. After Generation Swine, Motley Crue leaned back into their classic sound and image. This record stands as a textbook example of what happens when a hard rock band panics in the face of changing trends.
All my good intentions don't add up to very much, and I realize.
Number 10. Genesis, Calling All Stations. You know Genesis as either the wild prog band of the 70s or the slick hit machine with Phil Collins on vocals. This album is the weird in-between. No Collins, no big hits, and a new singer trying to front a band that wasn't sure who it wanted to be. The sound is dark, moody, and heavy on slow to mid-tempo tracks. There are some atmospheric moments, but the hooks are buried. Fun fact, some European fans have a soft spot for this era, but even they usually admit the material needed sharper writing and less plodding arrangements. After this, Genesis essentially went on ice as a recording band. Calling All Stations became shorthand for a classic act trying to continue without its signature voice, and proving just how important that voice really was. Number 9. The Velvet Underground, Squeeze. If you're a Velvet Underground fan, you probably know the 4 classic albums: the Banana One, White Light, White Heat, the self-titled, and Loaded. Then, there's Squeeze, the odd, almost forgotten final album that barely feels like the same band. The sound is light, mildly catchy, even Beatles-ish in places.
Coming soon.
But the danger, the experimental edge, the New York grime, all gone. What you get instead is polite, mid-level rock that could have come from almost anyone. Here's the kicker. Squeeze was basically recorded by Doug Yule alone after Lou Reed was gone, with session musicians filling in. Critics at the time dismissed it as a Velvet Underground album in name only, and it was held in such low regard that it was often left out of official discographies. Fun fact, Rolling Stone's list of 50 genuinely horrible albums by brilliant artists even name-drops Squeeze alongside other high-profile misfires, though some modern writers argue it's more bland than truly terrible.
It's goodbye.
Rolling Stone. After Squeeze, the Velvet Underground story was basically closed until the classic lineup reunited decades later. For rock nerds, this album is a fascinating, frustrating footnote, an example of how a great name can be slapped on music that has almost nothing to do with why that name mattered. Number 8. Aerosmith, Just Push Play. You remember this era. Frosted hair, shiny videos on MTV, and Jaded playing everywhere. Aerosmith, the bluesy hard rock band from Boston, suddenly sounded like they'd been locked in a pop producer's office for 6 months. The guitars are slick and processed, the drums are ultra polished, and there are layers of strings and pop sheen everywhere. Instead of gritty rockers like Toys in the Attic, you get radio-friendly, almost boy band level gloss with Steven Tyler wailing over the top. Released in 2001, Just Push Play actually sold well and gave Aerosmith another big radio hit. But hardcore fans and many critics saw it as their creative low point, accusing the band of chasing teen pop trends and sacrificing the raw, dirty edge that made them great. Several worst album lists single it out as one of the most embarrassing moments in their catalog. Fun fact, Aerosmith themselves later leaned heavily on their 70s material again live, with songs from Just Push Play quietly disappearing from set lists. For rock fans, this LP is the prime example of what happens when a classic hard rock band leans too far into glossy corporate pop. It's catchy, but it doesn't feel like Aerosmith.
Hey, Rocklore community. Before we continue, let's have a real talk for a second, bro. You know, this isn't just a channel to us. And I hope it's not just a place you come to watch a video and then forget about it. This is a community. It's a place where we get to dig up the secrets of rock and roll, share our favorite riffs, and celebrate the artists who maybe didn't get the love they deserved. Right now, only about 1% of our viewers are subscribed. We can change that together and grow this community. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button with the notification bell on. When you do, you're not just helping a channel grow, you're becoming a member of the Rocklore family. You're signaling to us and to YouTube that these stories matter, that this music is worth preserving, and that this community is a place you want to be. Subscribing is your way of making sure you're always in the loop. It means you'll be the first to know when we unearth a forgotten legend, drop a new countdown, or dive into a piece of rock history you've never heard before. So if you're a true fan of the lore, if you get that same feeling of discovery that I do, then come join us. It takes 1 second to be a part of something bigger.
Number 7. Queen, Hot Space. You know Queen for massive rock anthems, Bohemian Rhapsody, We Will Rock You, Somebody to Love. Now imagine dropping the needle and getting chilly funk grooves and early 80s disco instead. On Hot Space, the guitars often sit back. The bass and drums push dance rhythms, and synths take over. It's sleek, sharp, and very much influenced by late 70s and early 80s club music. The problem? A lot of rock fans at the time absolutely hated that shift. Released in 1982, this album confused the fan base and underperformed in the US compared to earlier Queen records. Critics pointed to the thin production and the band's attempt to chase trends after the success of the funky single, Another One Bites the Dust, and many lists still rank it near or at the bottom of Queen's discography. Fun fact, Hot Space also includes Under Pressure, their iconic collaboration with David Bowie, a stone-cold classic hiding on an album many fans otherwise skip. Over time, the record has earned a bit of a cult following, with some listeners praising its boldness. But for most rock fans, Hot Space is the go-to example of what happens when a rock band swerves so hard into dance music that they lose the crowd. Number 6. Van Halen. Van Halen III. You've got 3 eras of Van Halen. The wild David Lee Roth years, the slick Sammy Hagar years, and then there's the Gary Sharon album. This is that one. The record has long, wandering songs, fewer memorable hooks, and a strangely murky mix. Eddie Van Halen still plays like a monster, but the arrangements often feel overstuffed, yet somehow lifeless. Fun fact, Van Halen barely ever touched these songs live afterward, and the Sharon era ended quietly not long after the tour. For guitar geeks and VH diehards, Van Halen III is basically a what-if alternate universe. Proof that even one of the greatest guitarists of all time can't save an album if the chemistry just isn't there. Number 5. The Clash. Cut the Crap. Think about how legendary London Calling is. Punk energy, reggae grooves, political fire, one of the greatest albums ever. Now fast forward to 1985, when this band name came back. Without Mick Jones, without Topper Headon, and with a drum machine trying to act like a punk drummer. The sound is cluttered and harsh, with synthetic drums, shouted gang vocals, and tinny guitars buried under overproduction. Joe Strummer's voice still has passion, but it's battling a wall of dated 80s noise. Cut the Crap was the final studio album under the Clash name. Critics and fans tore it apart, calling it a disaster and a betrayal of the band's legacy. It's frequently labeled their worst album by a mile, and Rolling Stone later slid it into their 50 genuinely horrible albums by brilliant artists conversation alongside Metallica's St. Anger. Fun fact, the surviving members essentially disowned it. When you see Clash retrospectives and box sets, material from Cut the Crap is usually nowhere to be found. This record stands as a warning. If you remove too much of what made a band special and bury the rest in bad production, even a legendary name can't save you. Number 4. Kiss. Music from the Elder. Kiss built their legend on simple, sleazy hard rock and pyrotechnic stage shows. Then, in 1981, they decided to make a serious, concept-driven rock opera about a mythical hero. Yes, really. The album jumps between bombastic, orchestrated pieces, spoken word bits, and attempts at epic storytelling. There are still guitars and riffs, but they're surrounded by choirs, strings, and a plot that almost nobody could follow from the record alone. The band were trying to reinvent themselves after a dip in popularity, working with producer Bob Ezrin again, hoping for another Destroyer-style leap. Instead, music from the Elder confused critics, baffled fans, and bombed commercially. Some later interviews have members of Kiss openly calling it a mistake, and it's often listed among the worst albums from major rock acts. Fun fact, The track order was changed for different markets, which made an already confusing story even harder to follow. Kiss quickly abandoned the concept, changed their sound again, and moved on. But The Elder remains a cult curiosity, and a classic example of what happens when a party rock band suddenly decides they're going to save prog. Number 3. GunsNRoses, Chinese Democracy. This one wasn't just an album, it was a myth. For years, GNR fans heard rumors about endless sessions, changing lineups, insane budgets, and a record that might never come out. 17 years after Use Your Illusion, it finally arrived. And there was no way it could live up to that hype. The sound is dense and overcooked. Layers of guitars, synths, and effects fight for space. Some songs flirt with industrial rock, others with Queen-style drama, but the overall feel is too much. There are strong moments, but you have to dig through a lot of clutter to find them. Chinese Democracy is often called one of the most expensive rock albums ever made, with a production saga spanning over a decade, multiple studios, and countless musicians. Despite debuting reasonably well, it was branded a commercial disappointment compared to expectations, and many fans and critics saw it as a bloated, joyless monument to excess. Fun fact, a soda company even ran a publicity stunt promising free drinks to Americans if the album finally came out in 2008. It did. The promo website crashed, fans complained, and GNR's camp ended up furious about the whole thing. Over time, Chinese Democracy has gained a small cult of defenders who admire its ambition. But for a lot of rock listeners, it's the textbook case of how perfectionism, drama, and endless tinkering can crush the raw energy that made a band legendary in the first place. Number 2. Metallica St. Anger. If you were a metal fan in 2003, you remember this one. You hit play, the guitars roar in, and then that snare drum hits. Ping, over and over. It's like someone smashing a trash can lid in the middle of the band. The vibe on St. Anger is raw and claustrophobic. Down-tuned guitars, long grinding riffs, and James Hetfield sounding genuinely on edge. There are no guitar solos, the songs run way too long, and the mix is intentionally harsh, more like a rehearsal recording than a polished metal album. This was Metallica at a chaotic moment. Jason Newsted gone, Hetfield in and out of rehab, the whole band under a microscope. The album debuted at number 1 worldwide, but the reaction was wildly polarized. Fans and critics tore into the infamous snare sound and absence of solos. And in 2023, Rolling Stone put St. Anger on their list of 50 genuinely horrible albums by brilliant artists, calling it a deeply disappointing record. Fun fact, Metallica have played fewer songs from St. Anger live than from almost any of their studio albums, and that snare sound has become one of the most memed production choices in metal history. There are listeners who now defend St. Anger as an honest, ugly snapshot of a band in crisis. But even they usually admit it's a tough listen. And for a lot of metalheads, this is the worst-case scenario of a great band overcorrecting, stripping away too much of what made them thrilling. Number 1. The King of Rock Disasters, Lou Reed and Metallica's Lulu. On paper, it sounded wild. One of rock's most fearless art poets teaming up with one of the biggest metal bands on earth, making an album inspired by early 1900s German plays about desire and violence. In practice, fans of both artists sat there thinking, what is this? The sound is long, droning, and confrontational.
Floor, and in a coffin your soul shaking. I want to have you downing.
Metallica churns out repetitive, grinding riffs while Lou Reed delivers spoken-word monologues, sometimes tunelessly chanting over the top. Choruses are rare, hooks even rarer. the music often feels like a theater piece accidentally recorded by a metal band.
I am the tablet. These 10 stories.
When Lulu dropped in 2011, it was slammed almost instantly. Reviews described it as unlistenable, confusing, and one of the most baffling collaborations in rock history. Even articles ranking Lou Reed and Velvet Underground albums note that Lulu regularly appears on lists of the worst, most reviled records ever released by a major artist.
Progress. I'm the aggressor.
Fun fact, Lou Reed, being Lou Reed, said he loved it and brushed off the backlash. James Hetfield later admitted the reaction hurt, but the band stood by the experiment. Over the years, a tiny cult of listeners has tried to reclaim Lulu as misunderstood art. But for most rock fans, this is the disaster album, the one you play for friends just to watch their faces. If Saint Anger was Metallica at their most divisive, Lulu is the moment two legends joined forces and created an instant worst albums ever contender.
I want you on the floor and in a coffin, your soul.
Now I want to hear from you. Which album on this list do you secretly like? And what rock disaster did we forget to include? Drop your picks in the comments and let's argue it out like true rock nerds. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the beautiful failures of rock history, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next breakdown of the stories behind the music, the legends, and the train wrecks.